In this lecture, we'll explore how social psychology applies in the workplace, covering topics like hiring, performance appraisal, leadership, motivation, and decision-making. We'll examine not only the science behind these processes, but also the social dynamics that influence them. To set the stage, let's begin by looking at the field of industrial organizational psychology. IO psychology is the study of human behavior in business and other organizational settings. One of the earliest demonstrations of how social factors influence work behavior came from the famous Hawthorne studies, conducted in northern Illinois nearly a century ago. These studies found that simply being observed, just the presence of attention from the researchers, was enough to increase worker productivity. This phenomenon is called the Hawthorne Effect. It was one of the first clues that social context matters in workplace performance. Now let's turn our attention to how organizations decide who to bring into those work settings in the first place. Personnel selection is where organizational success begins. Hiring the right people is crucial, and the process used to recruit and select them can have lasting effects on group dynamics, morale, and performance. To understand how this process plays out, let's look at some of the tools used to evaluate job applicants. The job interview is one of the most commonly used selection tools, but research shows they have mixed value. On the one hand, interviews can reduce the interviewer's reliance on stereotypes. On the other, they're still vulnerable to other biases, like judging based on physical attractiveness or how similar they are to the interviewer. Interviews also tend to lack predictive validity, which means high scores don't do the job better than low scores. Plus, candidates often engage in impression management, distorting the truth to fit what they think the interviewers want to hear. And interviewers' expectations can shape the outcome. To illustrate, let's look at a classic psychological phenomenon called the self-fulfilling prophecy. This happens when interviewers' expectations influence the kind of interview they conduct. For example, when they expect an applicant to do well, they behave more warmly, which leads the applicant to perform better, thus confirming their initial expectation. Unfortunately, this dynamic can skew hiring decisions and perpetuate the interviewer's bias. Beyond the interview room, employers are increasingly turning to another source of information, one that applicants often forget to curate. Cyber vetting refers to using online information, like social media posts, to learn about applicants. Many employers report that it helps them find good candidates. However, we don't have enough research and evidence to support that conclusion. And there are ethical concerns about privacy and fairness, especially when applicants don't know they're being judged based on their online presence. So what can employers do to make better hiring decisions? One option is standardized testing. This includes intelligence tests, job-specific knowledge assessments, personality tests, and integrity tests. But caution is warranted. Some of these tests can be easily manipulated, namely personality and integrity tests. This chart shows that applicants can more easily lie and guess the preferred answer on an overt test that explicitly asks questions about how honest they are. Covert tests, on the other hand, ask about hypothetical situations or attitudes and tend to be more resistant to this kind of distortion and a better predictor of job performance, making them a better option when honesty is an important part of the job. Tests aren't the only alternative to traditional interviews. Another widely used method is the structured interview. This tool asks all applicants the same questions and evaluates them using the same set of criteria, which helps reduce bias and improve reliability. Another tool is the assessment center, where multiple applicants are evaluated in structured settings using simulations, group tasks, and trained observers who rate them using standardized scales. It's important to remember that hiring isn't just about evaluating people. It's also about creating a positive experience for the applicants as a way of managing the organization's reputation and attractiveness. For instance, research shows that candidates prefer interviews and simulations over impersonal tests, and if they feel disrespected or rushed at some point during the hiring process, they might decline an offer, even for a well-paying job. That's because today's workforce wants to feel valued during the hiring process. So when a company gives applicants time to ask questions, explains the role clearly, and provides feedback, they're more likely to feel respected and choose to accept a job offer. At the same time, organizations must balance fairness with efforts to promote diversity. That's where affirmative action comes in. It's one of the most debated topics in employment. It involves giving special consideration to historically disadvantaged groups in hiring and promotion. Supporters argue it helps correct systemic inequities, but critics view it as reverse discrimination. Social psychologists study how such policies affect not just individuals, but entire organizational cultures. For example, some employees may feel empowered by inclusion initiatives, while others may feel alienated or resentful if the policies are misunderstood or poorly implemented. These mixed reactions highlight an important point. Perceptions matter, and they don't just affect job attitudes, they can shape how people see themselves and each other. A woman hired under an affirmative action policy may worry her success will be seen as unearned, or a male coworker may feel overlooked altogether. And the company must manage both perspectives. How the process is communicated, like emphasizing that merit was also considered, can reduce tension and build trust. Research shows that when selection criteria are transparent and rigorous, both majority and minority group members are more likely to view the decision as fair. Ultimately, the way decisions are framed can make all the difference. People want to feel they earned their success. That's why clarity and fairness in selection processes are so important. When people believe decisions are based purely on group membership, it can undermine both self-confidence and trust within groups. For example, in one study, women who were told they were hired purely for diversity reasons rated themselves lower than women who were told they were selected based on merit. But if they were told, "We hired you because you're just as good as your male peers," their confidence remained high. So how the message is framed really matters. It's not just about what organizations do, it's about how they explain why they're doing it. So how can companies promote diversity without sacrificing trust and motivation? Companies can reduce negative effects by setting clear standards, providing performance feedback, and avoiding tokenism. For example, mentoring programs that match new hires with experienced staff can help people feel genuinely supported, not just checked off a list. Emphasizing development, mentorship, and inclusion helps create an environment where everyone can thrive. When done right, diversity can be a strength. Diverse teams bring diverse ideas, but also potential friction. Think about a group project where people had very different backgrounds or working styles. It may have been challenging, but those same differences likely helped you generate better ideas in the long run. So diversity can lead to creativity, but only if group members feel heard, respected, and able to communicate effectively. With that in mind, let's turn to how employee contributions are evaluated once they're hired, with performance appraisals. These are the formal evaluations of employee job performance. Ideally, these evaluations are fair, accurate, and constructive. But in reality, most are based on subjective judgments rather than objective metrics. Just like when a professor grades your group participation, there might not be a clear number to go by, so impressions and memory play a big role. The same applies in the workplace, where it's not always easy to quantify effort, collaboration, or creativity. Even when quantifiable data are available, they often fail to capture the quality or context of the work. For example, a sales rep might hit all their sales goals, but if they were rude to customers or undermined coworkers, that wouldn't show in the sales numbers. As a result, supervisors usually rely on personal observations, which are vulnerable to various biases. And yet, performance evaluations are crucial to organizational success. They guide promotions, raises, and terminations. So accuracy and fairness are essential. Let's break down some of the most common errors supervisors make when evaluating performance. First, the halo effect, where one positive trait colors the entire evaluation. Imagine you're known for always being on time. Your supervisor might assume you're also highly organized or proactive, even if that's not necessarily the case. That's the halo effect in action. Second, the contrast effect, where an employee is rated in comparison to others rather than by set standards. This happens when your performance is compared to a superstar coworker, making your solid effort seem less impressive. And third, restriction of range, where some supervisors avoid giving very high or very low scores, focusing mostly on the middle of the scale. This makes it hard to distinguish between average, good, and truly excellent performance. Self-evaluations are increasingly common, especially in 360-degree feedback systems, but the ratings are often inflated. Those in power tend to rate themselves higher, and in group projects, some people confidently claim they did most of the work, while others downplay their contributions. These biases matter, especially in workplace settings where self-evaluations influence decisions about raises or promotions. Meanwhile, upward feedback, where employees evaluate their supervisors, can be skewed by fear of retaliation or the desire to impress. Given these challenges, how can organizations make performance appraisals more accurate and fair? Researchers have identified a few key strategies. To improve accuracy, appraisals should happen soon after the observed behavior. Multiple raters should be used, and they should be trained to rely on job-related criteria, not their assumptions or preferences. And in some organizations, 360-degree evaluations incorporate feedback from supervisors, peers, customers, and other stakeholders. If a manager wants to evaluate your teamwork skills, it helps to ask your coworkers, who work with you day to day, rather than relying solely on their own limited observations. This comprehensive approach can provide a more balanced and fair assessment. Fairness matters not just in outcomes, but in how evaluations are conducted. According to the due process model, employees should be informed of expectations and get a chance to respond, and evaluations should be based on evidence. Perceptions of fairness influence how people accept feedback, even if it's negative. Students, for instance, are more likely to accept a lower grade when they understand the rubric and get feedback on how to improve. In the workplace, the same principle holds. Clarity, transparency, and open communication make all the difference. With that in mind, let's shift our focus from how people are evaluated to how they're led. Leadership is fundamentally about social influence, guiding others toward shared goals. But what makes someone a good leader? Is it personality, the situation, or a mix of both? Leadership isn't just about having authority. Think about leaders in your life, like coaches, teachers, and team captains. Some were effective because of their personality, others because they adapted to the situation and brought people together. So, What does the research say about who becomes an effective leader, and why? One answer comes from trait theories, which suggest leaders are born, not made. However, modern research supports the notion that traits, like confidence, ambition, and intelligence, help a leader emerge, but they're not enough. Think of someone who's smart and charismatic, but crumbles under pressure. In addition, we often idolize leaders who are outgoing and assertive, but research shows that quieter, more thoughtful individuals can also lead effectively, especially in environments that reward collaboration and problem solving. Leadership inspiration can take many forms. From Martin Luther King Jr. to Nelson Mandela, leaders inspire us in different ways. Think of your favorite teacher or coach and what made them effective. Some leaders gain followers by embodying strength and certainty. Others lead by listening and building trust. There's no single formula. It's about the right balance for the situation. That brings us to contingency theories, which argue that leadership success depends on the match between the leader's style and the situation. For example, Fiedler's model distinguishes between task-oriented and relationship-oriented leaders. Each performs best in different circumstances, based on control and clarity. In a crisis, like a team facing a deadline with lots of chaos, a task-focused leader is most effective. In a stable but moderately challenging environment, like planning a long-term project, a relationship-oriented leader will perform better. Let's break that down even further. Task-oriented leaders thrive when conditions are either very favorable or very unfavorable. Relationship-oriented leaders do best in moderately challenging environments. Think about a coach who leads a high-performing team with clear goals and minimal conflict. A task-focused style works well. But in a community project with mixed opinions and unclear goals, a leader who can build trust and manage relationships is more likely to succeed. Beyond leadership style, another important factor is how much participation a leader encourages, represented by the normative model. Sometimes, autocratic decision-making is best. Other times, group consensus leads to better results. The key is knowing how much input to gather from others, and when. For example, if a supervisor is deciding on a fire drill procedure, they might just inform the team. But if they're developing a new process or workflow, it makes sense to invite feedback and suggestions from the team members. Transitional leaders manage through exchange. They set goals, reward compliance, and correct poor performance. Think of a manager who promises a bonus for good sales, or takes away privileges for being late. It can be effective in routine, structured environments like retail or manufacturing, but may fall short in times of change, innovation, or crisis, when people need more than rewards to stay motivated. Transformational leaders, on the other hand, inspire followers to transcend self-interest and pursue a shared vision. They're charismatic, visionary, intellectually stimulating, and personally considerate. They're especially effective during periods of transition or uncertainty. Think of leaders like Maya Angelou or Barack Obama. They inspire people by tapping into values, purpose, and possibility. These leaders don't just tell people what to do. They help them believe in why they're doing it. Transformational leaders share 4 characteristics: charisma, inspiration, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. For example, a college professor who encourages open debate, challenges you to think in new ways, and checks in on your progress is likely using a transformational style. These leaders don't just manage, they energize. They motivate people to go beyond their job descriptions and see themselves as part of something meaningful. If you've ever worked for someone who made you feel valued, empowered, and excited about what you were doing, you've likely encountered transformational leadership. Despite progress, women and minorities are still underrepresented in top leadership roles. Research suggests that men and women lead differently. Men often adopt a more directive style, while women tend to be more democratic. Studies also show that female managers are more likely to seek input from their teams and prioritize team development. Yet, leadership is still often judged by outdated stereotypes, like the idea that assertiveness is a male trait. Furthermore, minorities may face barriers like exclusion from informal networks and mentorship, which can be critical for career advancement. Think about this. If you're not invited to after-hours social events, you may miss out on key opportunities to connect with decision-makers. Leadership is also shaped by culture. In individualistic cultures, leaders are expected to be assertive and independent. In collectivistic cultures, collaboration and harmony matter more. For example, in the United States, a strong leader might be someone who takes initiative and speaks up first. But in Japan, a great leader might be someone who listens carefully, consults the group, and makes decisions by consensus. These cultural expectations affect who emerges as a leader and how that leadership is perceived. At this point in the lecture, we're going to shift our attention to motivation. Why do people work hard or slack off at work or school? Social psychology offers several models to explain workplace motivation. We'll begin with economic reward models. But keep in mind, motivation is complex. It's not just about money. It's about meaning, recognition, fairness, and progress. Consider what gets you to give your best effort on a school project. Is it the grade? Praise from a professor? Or the excitement of doing something important? Probably all three of these and more. According to Vroom's expectancy theory, people are motivated when the following conditions are met. Expect that effort will improve performance, believe that good performance will be rewarded, and value the rewards being offered. Imagine you're taking on a challenging internship. You'll work hard if you believe your extra effort will lead to strong results, shown in Step 1. That those results will be noticed and rewarded, maybe with a job offer, shown in Step 2, and that the offer is something you value and desire, shown in Step 3. If any of those links are missing, your motivation drops. This cycle shows how goals drive performance. Specific goals lead to more focus and effort when compared to general goals like do my best. In addition, feedback helps sustain motivation, and success builds confidence. All of these steps reinforce each other to create a loop of improvement. Think of training for a 5K race. You set a clear goal, track your runs, notice your progress, and get a boost from achieving mini milestones along the way. That's the performance cycle in action. Something else to think about is how rewards are interpreted. If they're seen as controlling, like a bribe, they can undermine intrinsic motivation, the motivation that comes from within us. For example, if your boss offers you a cash incentive just to try harder, it might feel manipulative. But if they're seen as affirming, like a bonus, they can enhance internal drive. Like when your boss surprises you with a thank you bonus after noticing your great work, it feels like recognition. So, note that the same reward, framed differently, can have opposite effects on motivation. In one study, people who were paid to do a puzzle lost interest once the money stopped, but those who never got paid stayed engaged. This suggests that external rewards can crowd out intrinsic interest, especially when the task was enjoyable to begin with. It's not that rewards are bad, that can be useful for getting people started, But when the task is already fun or meaningful, adding money can make it feel like work. If you've ever turned a fun hobby into a job, like selling your art, streaming video games, or doing paid photography, you might have noticed that your enjoyment faded a bit once money entered the picture. That's the tension between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. According to equity theory, people compare their input-output ratio to the perceived ratio of others. In other words, they ask themselves, am I getting out what I'm putting in compared to everyone else? If they feel underpaid or overpaid, they'll try to restore balance by adjusting their effort or their perceptions. For example, if two employees with similar experience and workloads discover one of them is earning significantly more, the underpaid person may feel resentful and reduce effort, show up late, or mentally check out. On the flip side, someone who feels overpaid might justify it by convincing themselves their work is more valuable, or they may work harder to earn the extra pay and reduce guilt. These perceptions, whether accurate or not, can deeply affect motivation and morale. This experiment showed that workers who were temporarily moved into more prestigious offices worked harder, while those demoted to lower status offices worked less. It's not just the money, it's the status signals. A corner office, a reserved parking spot, or even being invited to leadership meetings can serve as signals of one's value in the organization. People respond to these cues, often subconsciously, because they reflect how others see us. It reminds us that how people are treated can matter as much as what they're paid. Men often earn more, not just because of outright discrimination, but also because they're more likely to negotiate aggressively. Women may worry that negotiating will make them seem difficult, ungrateful, or pushy. Studies show that even when men and women have identical qualifications and performance, men are more likely to ask for raises, and when women do negotiate, they're often judged more harshly. This can create a cycle where women are discouraged from asking, leading to continued gaps in pay and advancement. Organizations can help reduce this gap by setting transparent pay ranges, encouraging negotiation training for all employees, and normalizing the act of asking as a professional behavior rather than a personal risk. One study showed nurses lost sleep when their salaries were cut, but those with fair-minded supervisors suffered less. If you've ever gotten bad news from a boss who treated you with respect, you know how much the delivery of a pay cut and fairness matter, even when the outcome doesn't change. This shows that procedural justice, the fairness of the process, can soften the blow of negative outcomes. When people feel heard, respected, and informed, they're more likely to accept decisions, even unfavorable ones. A large study found that the number one motivator at work isn't money, it's making progress on meaningful goals. Think of how good it feels to cross items off a to-do list, solve a problem you've been stuck on, or finish a project you care about. That sense of progress creates energy. Even small wins, like helping a colleague or completing a challenging task, can generate satisfaction and momentum. That's the progress principle. Managers who highlight progress, give regular feedback, and recognize effort, not just outcomes, help keep people motivated and engaged. Now let's look at how people make economic decisions. Traditional economics assumes we're rational decision makers, weighing costs and benefits logically. But social psychology shows that emotions, social influence, and cognitive biases often drive our financial behavior. Have you ever bought something because it was on sale, even though you didn't need it? Or kept investing time or money into something just because you had already spent so much? That's human decision-making, rarely purely rational. We're influenced by loss aversion, sunk costs, and social cues more than we realize. Money doesn't just buy things, it changes how we think and feel. Priming people with money makes them feel more independent and less socially connected. In one study, participants who handled cash were less likely to ask for help solving a tough puzzle, even when they were struggling. Money triggers a sense of self-sufficiency, which can be helpful in some situations, but it can also be isolating. It's why financial stress can affect not just our bank account, but our relationships, our health, and our mindset. In an experiment, participants excluded from a group game felt less distressed if they had previously handled money. The implication? Money can dull social pain, offering a kind of psychological armor. But this comes with a trade-off. It can also make us less connected, less empathetic, and more transactional in our relationships. So money creates a buffer, but sometimes that buffer keeps others out. The stock market is supposed to reflect economic fundamentals, but it's also heavily shaped by emotion and social cues. Fear, rumors, groupthink, and even TV analysts can move prices. Think of the GameStop surge or crypto spikes. Much of that behavior was driven by online buzz, Reddit threads, and social identity, not just company performance or data. It shows how easily markets can be swayed by collective psychology. Investors often overreact to trends and misread random fluctuations. One common bias is the endowment effect, overvaluing things just because we own them. If you've ever tried to sell a used textbook and felt insulted by how little someone offered, that's the endowment effect. In the stock market, this can lead to people holding on to bad stocks, not because of logic or evidence, but because they believe in them emotionally. It's one more way our psychology influences our financial decisions. The escalation effect describes how people keep investing in failing projects to avoid admitting defeat. This is driven by what's called loss aversion and feelings of personal responsibility. Think of a company continuing to pour money into a doomed product just because they've already spent millions on it, or someone staying in a bad relationship because they've been together for decades. It's hard to walk away when you've invested time, money, or emotion, but sometimes that's the smartest move. Smart decision-making means ignoring sunk costs, which includes things like past time, money, or energy that can't be recovered. But that's hard. Think about continuing a Netflix series you dislike just because you already watched 5 episodes. The rational thing is to cut your losses, but human psychology resists that. We need to learn to make decisions based on future benefits, not past commitments. To wrap up, business decisions, from hiring to leadership to investments, are deeply shaped by social psychology. Whether you're applying for jobs, leading a team, or managing your finances, understanding these principles can make you more effective and more aware of the forces influencing others. The world of work is not just economic, it's social.